Hey guys, how is everyone doing today? My name is Kimmy. I'm a reporter at NBC Asian America. I cover the Asian American community and its intersections with policy, politics, culture, and entertainment. I am so stoked to start this panel. It's stacked with so many amazing women who have a lot of insight into their respective industries and kind of how to navigate this corporate world as an Asian American. I think it'd be amazing if we could start by kind of going around introducing ourselves, hyping ourselves up, and talking, just giving a brief preview of our own heritage and kind of our crowning achievement, something that I don't think we do enough as Asian Americans. I think I'd love to start with Linda.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Thanks so much, Kimmy, for moderating. And I just also want to say thanks and shout out to APAICS and Madeline and her team for putting this on, bringing us all together. Glad to be here. So my name is Linda Akutagawa. I'm president and CEO of LEAP, which is Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. My organization, what we do is we are all about growing, developing, and uncapping talent that we believe exists within our Asian and Pacific Islander communities, really working across sectors from the classroom to the boardroom, really to help uplift and elevate us as leaders, whether it's in our communities, whether it's in our corporations, whether it's in our classrooms. We have it. We believe that we can do it. And what I've been doing for a very long time, I won't tell you how long, but a very long time, is really to make this really happen more and to help us see more from our communities doing that. On a personal note, I guess I'll just share, since Kimmy did say, just hype it up. I'm going to hype up actually my little family, which is really my two dogs. I have a husband, but I always talk about my dogs. I am totally a dog mom, a fur mom, whatever you want to call me. Totally all about them. I have a cute little cockapoo and a cute little Jack Russell Terrier. And, I'm just always about just like, show me an animal and I will just be like, rather talking to the animals most of the time. So anyways, glad to be here. Glad to be part of this conversation and looking forward to, what's going to be a very interesting conversation. Right, Kimmy?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Linda, I'm obsessed with you already. I myself have two little blind kitty cats, so I get it, being really proud of your fur babies. Next, I'd love to go to Reshma.
Hi, everybody. It is so great to be here with everyone. And thank you again, Kimmy, for hosting. I'm going to start then by shouting out my furry, my dog, Stanley, who is literally the love of my life. I tell my kids that all the time. She is literally the best thing that ever happened to me. And if our house was burning down, I probably would save her first, which is maybe not the right thing to say, but I love her. I am the founder of Girls Who Code and the founder of the Marshall Plan for Moms. Girls Who Code is a global movement to close the gender gap in computer science and technology. We've taught over 450,000 girls to code and reached billions of young people through our culture-changing work. I am in the middle of building a movement to make sure that moms in America are not treated as this country's social safety net. And so I've launched the Marshall Plan for Moms, which it's a policy proposal to get moms paid leave, affordable childcare, many of the things that, President Biden is advocating for in his reconciliation bill. We've had a handful of bills introduced in Congress, one by our very own Congresswoman Grace Meng. We're also pushing the corporate sector to really make workplaces work for working moms because they never have before. And as there's this kind of clear on call to call people back to work and return to normal, I think we need to acknowledge that things are not normal and that we have an opportunity to kind of reimagine workplaces like we never have before. And then finally, really make the cultural change that we need to make. We don't value and dignify motherhood in this country in the way that we should. We think that motherhood is choice and that doesn't mean that you deserve what I would say like nice things. And I think really shifting culture, on valuing the work that working mothers do, and recognizing that this country doesn't work unless our American moms are kind of healthy. So more on that later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reshma. I'm going to go to Susan next.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Wow, that is incredible. I love learning more about your organization and look forward to hearing more, Rishma. But good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here and an honor as well. I am super proud to work at Salesforce, who is sponsoring this event. And, in preparation for this, well, first, I guess I should start out sharing a little bit more about me. So Susan Go, I'm a Korean American. My parents immigrated to the US a few years right before I was born. So raised by immigrants, first generation college student, as well as in corporate America. I've been at Salesforce for 4 years, and in that time, I've been active in our Asian American Employee Resource Group, as well as a number of other partnering with other employee resource groups. And as far as our overall quality initiatives, equality is a core value at Salesforce, and that really empowers employees to be active participants in that, because it takes all of us to drive inclusion and diversity in an organization. So I'm very proud to be in this role, in this position, to be able to participate today. I would say on a personal level, I'm very proud of my 3 children. And I think motherhood has taught me you never stop learning. And it's a lot of self-reflection and how I approach how to parent and help these 3 people that are entrusted to me to become good, responsible people. But I think it also just stems to just an overarching belief that I have that we are in a constant state of learning. And today's event and just over the events over these next 2 days is an example of that we are just always learning. And there's so much that we can learn from each other and so much that we can do by uplifting each other. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. I'm glad so far everyone's kind of sharing some personal things, which I feel that too many people only think of kind of corporate achievements as real achievements. So I'm really proud of us so far. We're at a great start. Right now I'm going to go to Sarah.
Thank you, Kimmy. So I'm really thrilled to be here. My name is Sarah Busey. I actually work for Accenture Federal Services. We are a federal government contractor, but I work also for the bigger Accenture, who is an over 500,000 person global consulting firm. I am here representing our Asian Pacific American Employee Resource Group, and I've been the executive sponsor for it for about 5 years now. And I'm super proud of what we've accomplished. Even in just the last year, amid the pandemic, we've grown the ERG in the United States from 3,500 people to 5,000 even just last week. We've launched also other Asian ERG groups in Ireland, in the UK, and in Canada. And so I'm just really, really proud of what we've accomplished, not only with the Asian ERG, but also broadly for women. So when I take this specific panel and thought, I think about I've been a woman in tech for over 25 years. I've always found it to be, I love technology. I find it to be inspiring. I find it to be something I'm driven by. So to bring these 2 things together for me are super, super exciting. And when I think about my family and my kids, I have a 14-year-old daughter now, and she's a freshman in high school. And one of the electives she picked was computer science. So, and that was not even with me pushing. It was her own interest to go. And I think about, when I think about what I did in high school compared to where she is, and the opportunities and the differences in just the educational opportunities and what she might have is just really, really inspiring. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about what Accenture is doing, what we're talking about with women in tech, and share the discussion with all these wonderful women.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. Last but not least, I'm going to Portia.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much to APAICS for having me. And thanks to Madeline for her leadership and for all the amazing work everyone is doing, especially on some of the issues of anti-Asian hate and so many important issues that you're taking on with the Congress and with other stakeholders. So hi, I'm Portia. I'm Taiwanese American. I work at a tech company. I work at Microsoft, but actually my background is in legislation and policy. So my job here is that I am the head of federal public policy here for Microsoft. And I'll do a shout out for something I'm super proud of that I've done at Microsoft that's professional and personal. Microsoft was actually the only company to sue DHS when they terminated the DACA program a couple of years ago. And we sued because we have a lot of amazing colleagues here at the company who would have been lost to us and would have been deported. And it was actually our case that went all the way from the DC District Court and was eventually upheld at the Supreme Court level, our case combined with a number of others. And it was just so rewarding to stand with our colleagues and bring them up to Capitol Hill and help them tell their stories. People who have had amazing lives and who are undocumented, have them have the chance to be their own advocates and tell their own stories. So that was really terrific, a personal and professional highlight.
Oh, that is so interesting. Thank you so much, Portia. I think I'd love to get into a little bit about your respective upbringings. I think about, as Asian Americans, many of us have somewhat either of a contentious relationship with our heritages, depending on the environment in which you've grown up and kind of the media that surrounds us, while others kind of cling to it as a badge of pride. And that idea is always kind of ever evolving, right? But I'd love to hear a little bit about how you grew up and whether your culture kind of influenced the way you move in the workplace or kind of influenced the way you chose a career. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to start with Portia this time.
So I'm from a small town in upstate New York. My parents immigrated here from Taiwan. I had that thing about being a doctor. Both my parents are doctors. Everyone in my family is a doctor. Every year at Chinese New Year, we get custom-made fortune cookies and we put sayings of our parents in them. And the saying for my mom is, "It's never too late to go to medical school." So that tells you a lot about where I was coming from. I'm the oldest, and my parents were totally bewildered when I changed tracks and dropped pre-med in my math major and went on. And I have to be honest, I think that was discouragement of women in STEM. I think if I had grown up now, it might be different. But I became an English major and then I became a lawyer. And I think that I think it's really hard sometimes for parents to understand when kids take a different path. But I feel really fortunate. And what's interesting, I'll tie that in with the culture thing. I did not grow up speaking Chinese or Taiwanese. My parents really wanted me to speak English. And so they really only spoke English to us. And but I find it's come full circle now because they wanted me to be sort of culturally proficient here. I have 3 kids. And they went to a Chinese language immersion school because I felt like it was really important. I went back in college and went to learn Chinese, and I lived overseas in Taiwan for a year. I felt like that was an important cultural connection for me, and my children are half Asian, and so I felt like I wanted them to have that connection to their heritage. They can let it go later if they want to, but I didn't ever want them to feel like they didn't know it or didn't have a touch point there. So squished a lot of things together. But
that's awesome. Wait, Portia, where'd you grow up? Because I am also a fellow upstate New Yorker.
Oh, that's right, I forgot. Just outside Albany.
Oh, nice. Okay, I wonder if we have like mutual. There, upstate New York is 5 people, so I'm sure we know people.
Well, especially Asian American people. Like I remember
going
to Toronto or something when I was older. I was like, there's an Asian person I don't know, and there's another Asian person I don't know. It's so crazy.
I know. It's wild when you see one that you don't recognize. Anyway, Stewart's Pride all the way. I'm sure you guys have Stewart's convenience store. Thank you so much. That is so interesting. I feel like, this goes along with kind of the idea that it's really like it is never too late to go back to medical school. It is never too late to repatriate yourself and kind of learn more about your languages and all that. So that's really awesome. Sarah, how about you? I'd love to hear a bit about your own upbringing.
Sure. So I identify as half Japanese American. My dad was actually 2nd generation. And actually he grew up actually in Japan and on the East Coast. He actually was during World War II, he was actually stuck in Japan, and his parents were in New York, and they didn't even know if they were alive at the time. So my dad was actually the first U.S. civilian to come back to the United States from Japan after the war. So it was a little bit of an interesting discussion. My parents met actually in Barcelona, Spain. My dad was doing his medical degree, and my mom was actually on a Fulbright scholarship studying languages there. And so a bit of a different perspective. They moved back to New York where my grandparents lived. And quickly after that, they moved to California. And then we moved to Central Florida. So when I say Central Florida, imagine orange groves. Just that's what it is. We're not talking about city. We're really talking about orange groves. Now, if you have kids and you've ever been to Legoland, that is my hometown. So that's what, for parents, they sometimes know what that is. But I grew up with like really very few Asians in around. We probably had maybe 5 or 6 families I can remember in probably a 30,000 person town. All kinds. So Korean, all East Asian though, Korean, Chinese American, Taiwanese. And my best friend was actually Taiwanese. So that was like my connection to sort of being Asian. When I think about like growing up Asian, my mom was white. So she was trying to learn about being Japanese American. She actually went in New York to school to actually learn how to speak Japanese, which is probably at the time a little bit unusual. But so like a lot of my Asian upbringing was very much a cultural mindset about like work hard, study, do well, long term, like my dad used to say, it's the marathon, it's not the sprint. And he was incredibly supportive. I will say, he was an OBGYN, so he worked a ton of nights. And so frequently I would wake up in the morning and he was coming back from work. And I knew very early that was not something I wanted to do for my life. So I sort of decided medical degree was off the list. And he was actually super supportive because I liked math and science. So I went to school to be a mechanical engineer. So now my kids are actually a quarter Asian, but I still think of them being Asian. My kids know that. But for me, it was very much a mindset. And I still think like when I hear do observations about being Asian, I still relate to many of those things. And a lot of intimacy, not just being Japanese American, but actually about just being more Asian American in general.
Mm-hmm. That's such an interesting point you bring up, Sarah. I think that sometimes in Asian America, there's some sort of litmus test, I guess, and people try to judge and try to dictate how Asian you are, or if you're Asian enough to be considered part of our community and our culture. And I love what you said about how, your kids and you identify clearly as Asian American, and you completely have the right to as well. Susan, I would love to hear from you. I know you mentioned that you are a first-generation college student, as am I, and it's a weird world, right? This corporate stuff. So I would love to hear about your upbringing next.
Sure, thank you. And yeah, so I will actually pick up right from there. I think being a first-generation college student and in corporate America, and I will say, so I mean, I grew up in a Korean-speaking home. My Korean is horrible though. But I made it by with communicating with my parents and through my sisters. But going into corporate America was definitely a culture shock because I didn't have that role model or examples, and I didn't grow up with anyone that I knew that was in corporate America. So a lot of it was just navigating those dynamics. And as I kind of look back now, and this is why my work with our Asian American ERG is so important, is I found that I was just adapting, right? I was trying to fit in. So I was like, okay, whatever they're joking about, they're talking about football or whatever the topics might be, I just adapted to whatever that conversation was. And I wasn't really showing up as myself. I wasn't embracing my culture at work. I embraced my culture at home and with my friends and in my community, but not at work. I kind of left that part at home. And it took me actually when my kids got older for me to realize we actually did a trip to Korea and Japan a couple of years ago. And my kids they loved it. They embraced the experience of being in Korea. It was so profound to see them experience it in that way. And it really kept me, we came back and I was like, okay, I want to really harness this and hold on to it for them. And then I really needed to do some self-reflection for myself of, am I doing a disservice to myself, to my children, to the next generation of Asian American women that are coming up through corporate America by not embracing that? And so I've really been leaning into that, being much more honest about just my experience, sharing that, having the opportunity to speak on panels like this, to just bring it to light that we all show up differently. And we need to create that space so that people can be authentic and not feel like they're going to be penalized, not feel like they need to adapt to the environment that corporate America is creating, that they need to laugh at the jokes and pretend that they went to that school or whatever they did. And I know I own my part in that adaptation that I did. I choose to let people make those assumptions about me. And so really just embracing it now and saying, okay, I'm not going to continue to wear that mask. I'm just going to embrace it. And what is the path that I can lay for the next generation?
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful salient point, Susan. I think that, as Asian Americans, we do kind of the race factor and how we are perceived, especially as women, is always constantly in the back of our minds. But we've also all undergone our own undergone our own kind of identity journeys, and that, what we, I guess, what we confront in these industries, in these worlds, I think have a huge impact on how we feel like others should see us, or how we feel that we should project our identities. Reshma, I'm going to go to you next. Do you feel, I'd love to hear about your own upbringing, and, whether or not that's kind of influenced the way you move in the workplace, and also, if that actually had an influence on your desire to even get into something like coding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I always say my parents came here as refugees. They're originally from 2 generations back, from Gujarat, but they were born and raised in East Africa. And so they came here as refugees in the 1970s. They were 2 of 1,000 refugees who got status to come here. Even though they were both trained engineers, my father worked as a machinist in a plant, and my mother sold cosmetics. And, my dad changed his name from Mukund to Mike to get a job. And so I grew up very much with this sense of like, I think my parents felt in order to make it, in order to have, put food on the table, they had to deny their identity, their religion, their name, everything. And, but they still needed community. And so, we grew up in the 80s, in the Midwest. And so if my mom, wore sari to the local Kmart, she would get made fun of. Our house was often teepeed, once that was spray painted, go back to your own country. And I remember like that morning after, my dad was out there with like Clorox. And I remember just watching him just cleaning off, the side of the house. And I actually think he was even like humming. And I remember watching him and saying to myself, I will never do that. And so I had the opposite effect, meaning like, I think I also, up until middle school, wished my name was Rachel instead of Reshma, and thought I was white. And then, got beat up at school, and then, again, had this massive awakening. And then I went the other direction. And it was all about like mobilizing marches and protests. And, since the time I was 13 years old, and being very, in your face about my culture, my religion, and who I am. And so my whole life has really been about, I think, that identity and that experience, and, making sure you're fighting against racism and discrimination, and uplifting people who don't have a voice, and not feeling like, for so long, and look, we still do it. I mean, for so long, I would, when I went to Starbucks, I would just say Maya, my niece's name, because I didn't want to go through all the hassle of being like, it's Reshma, freshman, without the F in the end. Like, that was just annoying. But I realized that now, especially, working in education with so many young girls, so many daughters of immigrants who are having the exact same experience. I mean, things have changed, but things have not really changed, for Asian Americans. And I think we really felt that, about a year and a half ago. But even when all of that, all of the Asian hate crimes happening, I remember people calling like, are you okay? And I was like, what? You're thinking about me? Like, I actually have a voice, in this conversation, because, my experience as an Asian American woman, as a South Asian woman, is often erasure. People always bump into me, or if I'm standing in line, like they cut, like it's almost as if I'm not even there. They don't cross the street because they don't see me. And I think it's like that has been so much of the pain, I think, of our community in many ways is finding our place, our voice, and, preserving our identity and our culture. So now with my two boys, I try to do my best, in terms of, practicing our Hindu religion, making sure we do classes, having Bollywood music play in the background, and, again, doing everything I can to raise them to be, brown and proud.
That's so awesome. Reshma, so many things you just said kind of launched a bunch of other existential questions I have. But then one big thing that I've been kind of thinking about for a while is, the idea that people, I think a lot of people assume that our parents, stayed silent, or, weren't involved in activism. But then there's also this other, fact of life, which is that, when you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, oftentimes our parents didn't have the cultural wherewithal, the language, the financial standings to do that. And so it's really our next generation to kind of fight for these rights and fight for equity in these different fields. And so what you're saying really, really stuck with me, because I think that is a huge kind of reflection of exactly that. I'd love to go to Linda next and just hear about your own experiences as well. And if you've kind of, been molded and shaped by your heritage as, in the workforce.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting hearing everybody's stories. And I realize that this is kind of different because usually I am one of many who grew up on the West Coast. And now I think I'm actually the only that has grown up in the West Coast. And I was born and raised in California. My parents are immigrants from Japan. And so I'll in I guess telling my story and kind of along the lines of what others have shared, let me just start with their story. So my parents are both survivors of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, Japan. So on that note, my upbringing as a Japanese American is very different from most of the other Japanese Americans that you all would meet or would know. And it's probably not too, I wouldn't say it's not completely, dissimilar to what Sarah also described, because her father, in a little bit different experience, but still, having grown up in Japan, that's what I heard, maybe a similar kind of experience there. But my parents were both, survivors of the atomic bomb. My dad came to the U.S. As soon as he graduated high school. Interestingly, and in some ways, I guess maybe my family story reflects a little bit of, the kind of the back and forth nature. My grandfather, his father, was actually born in the U.S., but then his parents, my great grandparents, returned back to Japan before the war. Interestingly and unusually, he was an only child, and they wanted him to grow up in Japan. And the story I heard from my grandmother actually was that their hopes was that he would marry a Japanese woman, and so they decided it would be best for the family to, move back to Japan because he was the only child. He returned back to the U.S. interestingly because he did have U.S. I guess he because he was born in the U.S. I guess he had a U.S. citizenship that he could claim because he was born here, and so he returned back to the U.S. Typical, what I would say a lot of his generation was the Japanese gardener. My dad, because of my grandfather, was able to enter the U.S. right after high school. But he came and he lived with a white family in Southern California as kind of like going to school, but also kind of like I guess he called it like a schoolboy. So he did chores around the house in exchange for living in this family's home while he learned English. My mom came a little bit later. She came in the 60s. She was in her 20s. So it was really interesting. So when people talk about this internment experience, it was not part of my growing up kind of story. It wasn't something that I fully understand. I grew up embracing and being immersed in a Japanese culture because of my family. I did not speak English until I started school because my parents only spoke Japanese at home. And so, sometimes when I tell people, English is not my first language, people are surprised. Even today now, I could still speak Japanese, although I do jokingly say now that my Japanese is only as good as what a parent can understand from their young child, because that's about as good as I can get now. But growing up in Southern California, it was interesting. A number of the panelists talked about being, maybe one of the few Asians in their communities. That was me too, believe it or not. I grew up in a California where, there wasn't a whole lot of Asians like it was before. I lived in a community, or I grew up in a community that was predominantly working class, and also predominantly Latino. And I sometimes would tell people, you know, growing up, I used to think I was actually Mexican more so than I was Japanese because all of my friends were Mexican American. And there weren't a lot of Latinos because most people who were in Southern California at the time were from Mexico. So, you know, a little bit different kind of experience. And it wasn't until really high school that I started to have other friends that were not just Mexican American. It was, I had white and Asian friends. And so it was kind of like what you all grew up with, but then also not because, you know, being in Southern California, and I think this also reflects kind of the environments in which we're all working in. One, when I started working in a travel company. It was really interesting in being able to do that kind of work. It allowed me to explore other cultures and really immerse myself in what we now call, you know, DEI work. Because of the travel that I was able to do and the people that I worked with. Um, but now I've been working at Leap for quite a bit of time, and part of the reason why I believe, you know, for me, I stayed. There was a couple reasons. One is I really liked the work that we were doing. I really believe that I was making a deep difference, and really being able to take what I was learning in terms of the work that we were doing with companies across, you know, basically not only the US, but across the world, and bring it to other companies and being able to share it. The second thing I would also just say is that when I first started working, you know, someone mentioned something about the kids and being able to create something different for the next generation. I heard that even 20, 30 years ago. And I think that there was really a hope that things would change much more quickly than it did. But I think one of the things that I would say that I have hope for is that I think we've all reached an inflection point now where there's enough of a critical mass of not only Asian, Pacific Islanders, but also really a broad diversity of people of color where we're now really not going to just let ourselves just say, what do we do to fit in? What do we do to be like everybody else? We're now standing up and just saying, you know what? We're going to be who we are. We are going to bring our best, most, you know, interesting, whole, authentic self to our workplaces. And, you know, I think what's really important and the reason why for me conversations like this become really important is that um, change only starts to happen when we are all willing to stand up and challenge the status quo. And I feel like that's really part of what we as leaders have an opportunity to do. But now it's not just us alone, it's us plus everybody else who's coming behind us, it's everybody else who has come before us. And it's I just really can't say how excited I am about what the future holds for all of us.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts too, Linda, after what you said. I think that, you know, thinking about what we have kind of been through in our respective workplaces, and I know that Reshma and Susan had kind of brought this up about, you know, the ways in which we present ourselves and react to different experiences we might have had when we were younger, and then trying to reclaim what it is and what we're able to bring to, you know, our fields. I want to get into a little bit about the racial environment you guys have observed in your industries. Specifically, I think mentorship is a really, really huge factor, and it's kind of a make it or break it thing for people across a lot of professions. There's been research that shows that, you know, people in the legal profession, for Asian Americans, have had such difficulty finding mentors, and that's why there's a huge kind of a lack of Asian American judges, because that mentorship was never there. And in talking to a lot of Asian American women in particular, you know, that seems to be a parallel across so many industries. I think I'm going to start with Reshma first. If you could talk a little bit about, what you've observed in terms of mentorship in your industry, if you feel like people were really willing to kind of lift you up, and if there was someone you want to shout out, or something, or a program that you felt that really kind of fast tracked your way, or kind of accelerated your own love of your industry, and kind of lifted you up in a way that perhaps others haven't been able to normalize in other fields.
Well, I mean, when I fell in love with politics, like very early on, and I had gone to this, I was a part of this minority leadership fellowship program in Washington D.C., and that experience just like changed everything for me. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to build Girls Who Code, because having those experiences as a young woman are just transformative. Mm-hmm. For me, I've always had a sisterhood of women and men who have lifted me up. I've run for public office twice. I've lost twice, but like my first donors, I would say the first $50,000 I raised was from like Indian aunties that were just so happy an Indian girl was running for office. There's always, even now with Marshall Plan for Moms, the first one or two stories, it's a South Asian journalist, you know what I mean, who is the one who's like amplifying something, that I'm working on. So I've had so many, I think, young women, or women generally, who have lifted me up and given me support, and given my, my ideas and the movements that I've been building voice.
That's awesome, Reshma. I that is, that really speaks to the power of community. I think a lot of times we underestimate how powerful the Asian American community can be when we really band together. Susan, I'm curious, and you've spoken too about, the ways in which you've had to kind of mold your behavior in the workplace. In terms of mentors and people who are willing to kind of see past that, or see you for the entirety of Susan. Do you feel that you had that experience, and if so, how would you kind of implement that same thing to generations to come?
All right, thanks, Kimmy. So it was actually, I attended an Asian American professional event a couple of years ago, and one of the topics we're talking about is more representation and leadership, right? And we talk a lot about getting to senior leadership, getting even to the C-suite or onto boards of public companies, and the barriers that we continue to see, or the numbers aren't there where we would want. And I was thinking about my own journey of being first generation, and just kind of reset my perspective of, yes, we would love to see more now, but also recognizing that each group, each immigrant family that comes is somewhere at a different point on their story. So what can I do to embrace the position that I have now and help set the stage so that maybe in the next generation, we're ascending to the highest ranks. So again, kind of that forward-looking hope that instead of being frustrated that we're not where I would like us to be, where can we start paving the path that we can get there? But I really think that, while I would have loved to have, had an Asian American woman as a mentor, again, to that point of being in high-tech sales my whole career, there just aren't a lot of Asian Americans, period, overall. But I have met many. And I would say more so in finding a mentor, it's around finding someone that understands you. And it doesn't really have to be the same race or gender. I've had amazing mentors throughout my career, from people that I've worked with, from personal people that I've known in my personal life. And I think the more important part is, does this person understand you, your talents, your abilities? Do they help support you in identifying your goals and giving you those, not even, I don't want to say that they're opening doors, because that's not necessarily what a mentor's doing. It's more of helping you crystallize and understand your fullest potential and giving you that nudge. And I think if we just really look for the people that we genuinely connect with, that sees that in us, that's the most powerful thing. But I will say on the just increasing more Asian American mentorship, I did want to highlight, we have a program within Salesforce through our quality groups to create a mentorship program, so that, as we're thinking about not only hiring more diversity and underrepresented minority groups, we also need to think about the retention and the promotion of them. And so this mentorship program is to facilitate that, right? So once you get in, you're super excited to be at this company and you believe in its mission. Do you have the support to continue to grow and progress and not leave the company? So we are, I think, as we look for more companies to do that, make that investment specifically targeting these minority groups, because Kim, you bring up a good point, right? We show up differently. And yes, there's mentorship, but there's also nuances to how we show up, how we communicate, and being able to connect with someone that really understands that and can speak to that and really just kind of break through some of the barriers that we're going to have up that's going to take longer to break down.
That's awesome, Susan. Yeah, all really salient points. I think that, you know, when we think about Asian American women and kind of that like racialized sexism, I guess, that we see in the workplace, it is so important that someone kind of lifts us up, because only we really understand what that's like. And so much of what you said, just having that path and making sure that you can really do that for someone is so important, that kind of conscious effort to do so. I have so many more questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a different question for Sarah, Linda, and Portia. And we're going to hopefully keep our answers a little bit shorter, but I do want to get to these last two or three, because I think it'd be really helpful for especially the younger people coming up and also companies looking to be more inclusive. So my first question, I'm going to start with Sarah, is just right now we are in kind of this period where I don't think that Asian racism is any different than it was before, but it is more recognized, right, by the mainstream. And so right now we're seeing this huge push from a lot of corporations, and you'll see some, you know, kind of questionable social media campaigns that, you know, are really about, will try to, you know, help or you know, promote the Asian American community. But the criticism from a lot of activists and advocates is that many of these campaigns and many of these actions from these companies are very performative. And they don't necessarily demonstrate that there's a real investment in Asian America. So I guess my question to you is, you know, what are some things that don't work? What are some things that you've seen recently that don't really do much for Asian America and are kind of just, you know, that companies should avoid? And also, if you had some things that you feel are really productive and are a real show of, you know, investment in our community, and more specifically, even Asian American women.
Sure. Let me talk about, you know, on the onset of the pandemic, I think, you know, a lot of us were going through lots of things. There was a rise in Asian hate. And while we saw it externally, you know, I was following, you know, Twitter feeds on things going on in Northern California, New York, and Southern California. We all felt it. And about, I guess, 4 years ago at Accenture, we started what we called Building Bridges events. And these Building Bridges events were actually something where it was bringing the entire North American community together to have a conversation, a candid conversation. And we did 2 of these that actually happened. One at the onset of the pandemic, probably May-ish timeframe originally. And then we did one with sort of the uptick again in February or January, like February, March of the following year. And what I'd say about it, what was effective about those sessions was people were being real about their experiences. Whether it be just things that have been normalized, but also things that happen in the community that we talked, I think maybe Susan or someone mentioned, we compartmentalize our lives at times, right? We talk about this is our work versus this is our persona at home versus this is our persona like with our friends or something. It was bringing those personas together so that people had a perspective of, you may not realize the things that I'm going through, but let me articulate them and explain them to you in a different way. And they were really, really heartbreaking and touching at the same time. And what was also good was we had our leadership there to sort of commit to change. And so, you know, one of our motto is let there be change at Accenture. And that was one of the ways we really put this forward. So while I think it's hard, and I think there are things that sometimes seem performative, this was really a change agent. It changed how we talked to each other, how we discussed racism, not just, and we didn't have it sort of in little like boxes anymore. It was more, what are the commonalities of racism that we see and the discussions that we had. Now, my hope is that that goes beyond, Accenture outside, but that was something that for me really does work and started a series of change within Accenture.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think cross community conversations really have been starting to bubble up a little bit more. And I think that too is something that I think a lot of advocates have been talking about, just building coalition across the board and really reaching outside of the Asian American community, because, we don't live just in these bubbles, and it is useful for everyone to have this knowledge. I'm going to quickly go to Linda and Portia. So Linda, how have you observed anything that has really worked productively, to enforce more diversity and be more inclusive for the Asian American community recently during the pandemic, as we've seen this kind of anti-Asian bias across America?
Sorry about that. I guess I had myself muted. Can you just clarify what you meant by enforce more?
Just kind of any programs or actions you felt that made the workplace a little bit more inclusive and really show that there is a real investment in diversity, rather than kind of just being performative or for show.
Yeah, I could definitely talk about that. I don't want to name, company names, but I mean, it's been interesting this last year. We've had experiences in which we've been asked to do what I would call, maybe light things. They want us to come in and do like a presentation during Asian Heritage Month, and I'll be honest, I mean, I think those are important. At the same time, they feel a little check off the box-ish, right? Because on the one hand, yes, how do we help get people to really understand us without having some of these opportunities? At the same time, it's just then nothing, like we hear nothing. And then there are other companies that I think are out there that really are trying to be intentional, are really trying to not only leverage their Asian ERGs, but also really looking at the data within their companies. And I'm just going to just say this, especially because this is a tech panel. What's always interesting to me is that when I do have the opportunity to see some of the internal data about representation in a company, they'll show you like Asian, Black, Latino, women, and white men in particular, but whites as well too. And if you look at the numbers of the entry level folks, the numbers are going to be mixed. But then when you start looking at it across all the various levels within the company, so you go from like individual contributor to like maybe a team lead to a manager, to like a director, to like like executive and C-suite. What's always interesting to me, and this has been consistent across almost every single company that I've had the privilege of seeing their data, when you look at Asian, Black, Latino, and even women, just in general, the trend lines always go down. So you start at whatever numbers you see, and then the trend lines go down the further, higher up you get. But for white men in particular, it's always the opposite. They have their number, but their trend lines always go up. So the higher up they go, the more representation they have. It's never where, you start out in one number and you kind of create that kind of proportionality or equity. And so the reason why I'm talking about this is that I think it's really interesting, and I'm glad to see that there are companies that are looking at that data and looking to see how do we create change in places where it matters. Where are the places where they're having problems, where maybe for Asian Americans, and I'm speaking specifically our Asian Americans, I think what's missing is better data for Pacific Islanders particularly. And even then for Asian Americans, I do also just want to acknowledge that there may need to be further disaggregation given how diverse our communities are. There's East Asians, Southeast Asians, and South Asians, and the representation is very different amongst those three big Asian groups. Mm-hmm. But anyways, what we are seeing is that there are companies that are looking at where are the pain points, where are the places where Asians are topping out, where are they not moving, or where are they getting bottlenecked, and what can they do to change that. And what I'm also seeing is then there is greater interest in really being able to invest in leadership development of these individuals, where they are not only maybe sending people to different leadership programs, but they're also looking to see how can we create something that we bring in that is integrated internally, so that then there's programming that's targeted to their Asian employees, trying to move them from one level to the next. That's what I would say is going beyond the performative, because now they're really investing, significant resources to really help move them. And this wasn't something that I was seeing before. There was this model minority myth that Asians don't need help. They're good. This is going to sound a little rude, but we were seeing, the nice way of saying it is white adjacent. I call it, we were the other white me, where people kind of saw us as the alternative, and we were grouped together with white men. But this is the problem of doing that. We have such diversity, and our numbers were not being borne out in our representation at the more senior levels. And I think that that's a challenge. And this is where I hope that this has spurred and will continue to, we as a community will continue to see investment in our communities for our leadership development, so that we can show what we have, what we can do. And also that as part of the systems change that I would like to see in companies, that they also see that we don't have to fit that cookie cutter kind of way of showing up as a leader, command and control, loud, aggressive, we have those in our community, but we also have those who are not too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Linda. I think that you brought up a great point about kind of looking at the hard data and identifying actual disparities. Portia, I'm going to go to you now, and I would love to also hear, what you feel are kind of some performative actions and then some actual productive things that we should really be implementing to raise up Asian American women. Portia, I think you might be muted.
Sorry, I think it was defaulting to the wrong microphone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I think that, I don't know, I haven't been in the corporate sector for more than a few years. I think there's a lot, honestly, in the corporate sector that is performative, right? That's part of what it's about. It's about marketing, it's about sales, it's about brandishing corporate image. But speaking to my role now, and also I used to lead a major federal agency before I got here, something I saw really consistently, to build on what Linda said, is this issue of Asian Americans topping out when you have to make the bridge from a technical, strong individual contributor to a manager's role. That's where everyone tends to fall off. And that's not just Asian Americans, that's African Americans and Latinos, women, of course. But in particular, and I would meet with the Asian resource group, the Asian American resource group. And, there were tensions, because some people would say, I don't want the things that a manager has to do. I don't want to have to be in that public facing role. But I think, as individuals, and I say this not to discourage any younger in career folks who are on, but you just have to at least be aware of that dynamic. There may be still vestiges of that perception of, you're strong technically, but do you have what it takes to lead? And I think that's why Linda's comments are so important. Part of it is saying, yes, we do, maybe taking on some of those tasks. One thing I wish I'd done differently, my parents didn't understand my career choice at all. But when I graduated from law school, my father showed up and gave me a bag of golf clubs. I'm like, what is this, Dad? And he said, I don't know anything about lawyers, but I know lawyers play golf. You should go learn. And I didn't. I still have those golf clubs. I've played like twice. But I wish I'd listened, because he's right. Like, you have to do other things beyond being technically proficient in your role. And that's something I think for those of us in politics, we really understand that deeply. I do think, though, we also want to, try to engage on other fields of leadership, but also change the meaning of leadership and open people's eyes to different ways of leading. And that's something I have to say I'm really grateful for Microsoft for doing, is we've taken on some of these issues, like had conversations about covering, for example, for those of you who have read Kenji Yoshino's book, of like how people sometimes feel like they can't be their real selves at work. And how does that hurt an organization? And I feel like those can be really powerful conversations to have.
That's such a great point, Portia. I think that a lot of times when we think about leadership, it is kind of just through very much this white Western lens. And that's kind of the only thing that's accepted as, as a true leader. Whereas, Asian Americans, kind of regardless of the ways in which we move, even if we are leading in some ways, in more covert ways, that, we will always be stereotyped as kind of this meek, good worker bee versus a leader. And I'm really glad you brought that up. People don't realize that there's a whole spectrum of what leadership looks like. And so it is really interesting, kind of this idea of shifting what that means altogether. I'm going to go to my last question before I go to audience questions. But I want to go around really, really, really quick. If everyone can think of just 1 or 2 sentences of advice, and I know that we've all kind of been through this journey and thinking about our own identities from when, from childhood and how that's shaped and evolved in the workplace, knowing what you all know now and knowing, what the environment is like for Asian American women. If you could tell, your younger self or someone coming up right now, just 1 or 2 sentences of really salient advice, or if there's something you would rather you would redo yourself, what would that be? I'm going to start with Sarah.
I was thinking, Kimmy, what quick questions. I always think about 2 things whenever anybody asks me like my best piece of advice. The first one is have a point of view and express it. You have to be able to share and articulate your point of view so that people know what you're thinking, because no one's a mind reader. The second thing is to be able to be proud of what you've done and be able to verbalize that as well. So share your success. It's not, and as an Asian American, I used to think it was bragging. I thought it was below me to say, hey, I succeeded doing this, or this is what I accomplished, but it's not. You're just saying what you did, and that's all good. And we should share our success with others.
That's a great point. We should be proud. We reserve the right to be proud of ourselves. Linda, real quick, 1 or 2 sentences on what kinds of advice you would have given your younger or someone who's coming up the pipeline now.
I would say take risks, take lots of risks. When you're young, you have so many opportunities, explore them all. I think don't get too caught up in what you're doing now. If there's something else that interests you, this is the time to do it before you have many other obligations that you feel like constrain you from doing other things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Experiment when you're young, try to explore, and totally get it. Susan, how about you? Some advice you'd give someone else coming up today?
Sure. I would say network. And I know network has kind of different meanings, but for me, networking is really around creating connections. And we talked about mentorship, and we talked about representation and growing the ranks is what we're talking about today. And the more you can create genuine connections, grow your connections, just opens your reach and your opportunity. It also gives you an opportunity to connect with people that you can be your authentic self, because you do need that space that you can show up in that way. So if your work environment or your life environment doesn't provide that, the bigger and broader your connections and your network can be, and more supportive that's going to help you propel and explore avenues that you might never have considered before.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to go to Portia now.
So I'd say you only need 25%. My law school professor told me that men say they can do a job when they can only do 25% of it, and women say they can do a job when they know how to do 75%. And so through my whole career, I've tried to say, yes, I can do it even though it doesn't feel to me like I can do that. So it just think about those differences and really challenge yourself to raise your hand and say, yes, you can.
Oh, for real. It's jarring what men say that they can do. And so I totally agree. I think that it is, saying yes and just believing in yourself, it surprises people, but we have so much more ability to do what we can do than what we assume we can do. And then finally, Reshma, how about you? Do you have any advice for those younger generations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say be brave, not perfect. I think as Asian Americans, as daughters of immigrants, we orientate towards perfectionism and we gravitate towards things that we're good at. And often that leads us in lives and jobs and marriages that we're miserable in. And so, practice bravery, do things that make you feel uncomfortable, take risks, fail, and build that bravery muscle.
Awesome. Yeah, that is all. You guys all have great advice, and I wish I heard from you all when I was a lot younger. I'm going to go to our one audience question, which I think is actually really, really useful. I know that you all have been in kind of these leadership positions, but this is more for, those who kind of aren't in those positions yet. This is from Amy from YouTube. She asked, do you have suggestions for AAPI women not in senior positions who want to be inclusive of different linguistic, ethnic, or religious backgrounds in the workplace? What can we do to help build that inclusive environment and be change agents? I think I'm going to start with Linda on this one.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. That's a really great question. I think part of it is, or where it starts with you, and for you to just model what does that look like when you use or include them, the kind of language that you use. I think what that does is believe it or not, it can be contagious. It can help inspire others to use similar language that is more inclusive. It's what you do, and just continuing to do it. And also if you feel brave enough, and I think that was a great a piece of advice from Reshma, and you want to take the risk, you could, in a very diplomatic way, also help people understand why you use certain kinds of language, and also hold people accountable to using that more inclusive language, so that everybody feels like they have a place that they belong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Reshma, what do you think? What are some tips for, just people that aren't in senior positions to really create that inclusive environment?
Yeah, I always think, look, I think that you can make a change even when you're not in a senior role. And I think we're seeing that in society. I live my life with like teenage girls who are like finding cures to cancer, COVID, and, and climate. And so I always tell them, like, you're never too young to make the world a better place. And I think you're never too junior, to make your company more equal, more equitable, more fair. And so, find and build, I think, coalitions and allyships with other people who kind of feel the way that you want, and, and make that change.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really never too young or never too junior to start, I guess, is the moral of the story. Portia, how about you? What do you think?
I want to foot stomp on what Reshma said. I think, there's self-leadership, right? Like leading by example. I do think one of the things we talked about in our company after we did some of these covering trainings is like, if you say more about yourself and are willing to be vulnerable about who you are or raise your concerns, it'll create room for others to also do the same thing, even if they're not from the same ethnic or religious or military service background as you are, right? Like it'll just create room to be more open about that and bring our whole selves to work. And I think that can be really powerful. And of course, asking, I did appreciate that other colleagues asked me when the anti-Asian hate incidents were happening that I was like, wow, you remembered I was Asian? Like, I'm so gratified, right? But I was like, oh yeah, you know what? It's important to reach out, and leaders should say something after anti-Semitic incidents, after George Floyd. Like, there are all kinds of reasons we need to recognize tough things that different communities are going through, and you can do that as an individual, not just as a leader.
Yeah, Portia, I think what you brought up too, leading by example and just kind of making it, just affirming that, it's it's comfortable to be my whole self around you, you know, and just showing that that environment is around them. I think that's a really, really great point. Susan, how about you? How do you feel that you can create that kind of inclusive environment?
Yes, I love that question because I firmly believe it starts with the individual, right? It's not up to leadership. It's all of us play a role in creating that inclusive environment. You know, definitely explore if your organization has employee resource groups. If they don't, you know, take the charge in starting one. But I also love that this question included accents and religion and different faiths. And I think just really thinking broadly beyond just how we all show up. And I want to highlight one of the organizations I've had an opportunity to work with is Upwardly Global, and they provide job services for highly skilled immigrants and refugees. And I've participated on a number of these mock interviews. And the big advice we always give, and I think the biggest hurdle that they feel is their accent and how that's going to come across in corporate America. And while they're doing their best to work on their communication skills, I really believe it's on us in corporate America to change our mindset in what, like, I can understand you, right? That's what counts, not necessarily how the sounds are coming across. So I think it goes both ways. And I would challenge corporate America to think about what are the biases that we're holding when we hear someone speak English and with an accent, and really check in. And is it critical? Like if they're customer facing, or maybe they're going to be a very vocal role, and it's going to have more of an impact. But still, I do feel like, you know, we need to just change our mindset and open up that perspective to be more inclusive of how we all show up, and that extends to how we pronounce and speak English.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think that's a great point too. You know, a lot of the introspection and proactive introspection, I think that's been going on in the past year has revealed that there are a lot of biases that people have never actually realized that they have, and it has kept people back, and it has kept a lot of you know, women of color back. And so that is a, you know, that is something that we all just kind of have to check in and realize that we're not just born completely pure and have absolutely unbiased everything, you know? So thank you so much for that. Sarah, you have the last word on this. How do you think we're going to create that inclusive environment in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, we all, a number of said this, it's one person at a time. You know, I'm a big believer in asking people what they think. Like, even if you're in a meeting and everybody, you know, there's out of the 6 people, there's 3 people that are always talking, you know, take a moment to say, hey, so-and-so, what do you think? Do you want to share? It looks like you give a point of view, and not to put them on the spot, but creating that discussion so that people feel comfortable using their voice. I also would say that it's important for us to stand and support others that are not like us, or where we feel that we aren't necessarily immediately what we feel is not like us, because we need to seek to understand where they're coming from and grow our minds and sort of a growth mindset, if you will, to like just expand our horizons. And for me, that's super important. So while we're here talking about Asian American women, you know, we're trying to make the world a better place and our companies a better place. And that's a better place for a variety of different groups that are facing different challenges. So I really think it's important not only to like identify, like get involved with your employee resource groups, but also educate yourself, read different things, challenge your own biases, because that's where you start to grow and start to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, all the panelists, for joining me and bearing with me today and all my questions. And quick shout out to APAICS. I think that this has been such a cool panel. I'm honored to speak with you all today. And I definitely wish I had this, like, you know, 7-8 years ago when I was just a little baby corporate person, just trying to figure it out, trying to report in the world. Thank you again. I hope everybody took away something from this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.